We are going across the United States on a road trip, and today we're going to look at South Dakota. So, who's been to South Dakota? I'm sorry. No, I'm just kidding. No, there was actually, when I was looking at tourist traps for South Dakota, there was a lot of things to see. There was a lot of cowboy stuff. So there was like stuff devoted to Jesse James and Wild Bill Hickok. There was a Chief Crazy Horse thing. There was a Sitting Bull thing. South Dakota, they even have their own version of Buc-ee's. They only have one, though, and it's called the Wall Drugstore. It's a big green thing, and it's probably 5 times bigger than Buc-ee's. And it's like a mall, and it has like electronic dinosaurs in there and a singing gorilla inside. So just for that alone, I wanted to go see it. But the weirdest thing I found was the 1880 Wild West town. So it's an attraction. It was built by a guy named Dean Songstant in the 1960s. So it's a Wild West town, but it's populated by animatronic mannequins. It's all outside, and after he built it, since then, it's never been maintained, fixed, painted, or repaired. Since the 60s. So it looks really, I found a little video of it, so we can all pretend like we're going to go and visit the 1880 Wild West town right now. You can turn the volume down, you don't need the volume for it. But doesn't that look exactly like President Lincoln wearing sunglasses and a hand-drawn like felt marker, President Lincoln speaks, like that just looks so authentic. And it's just, he just records his own voice over the top of it. And the last guy, his music fell on the ground. And nobody's ever bothered to just, like, if you went, you just want to go and help the people that work there. You're just like, no, this goes back here, and this guy's body is huge, and his head is small. And he's not even hitting the thing that's on the anvil. Like, it's just, but I mean, it works, I guess. It looks like he's got a thing of chew in his front pocket. This guy's scary. Look at it. It's covered in dust and cobwebs, and you can learn all about the Wild West. The next one is really, I don't know what's going on. I didn't want you to hear. So he's getting his legs sawed off. This is the medicine bag, and it's a wood. That's a saw that you'd use to cut down a tree, and just everybody else seems complacent about what's going on. And that's a gorilla with disproportionate arms playing the piano. So I don't know. If you want to learn all about the Wild West, go to the other 1880 Wild West town that's down the street. Don't go to this one, because this is the perfect combination of fun and fear. So we're kind of doing an anti-series. The sermon subjects don't really tie together other than the fact that I say they do. And so I just wanted you to feel like you could pop in all through the summer and just feel like you weren't going to miss out on anything. So today we're going to talk about conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is a way for two parties to find a peaceful solution to something that was a disagreement between them. It could be financial, it could be political, personal, emotional. And so when a dispute arises, often the best course of action for us is to negotiate, to find a resolution to that. And you would say, that's great, David, but why are we talking about it in church? Well, I think that it's something that we can all get better at, yes? I think many of us are probably not good at it. I am not great at it. I used to be a lot worse. The old me would just walk away. So if there was a problem between you and me, I would just shut down and I would just walk off. And if you had something maybe and you had to have it, then I would just give it to you, because my thought was, well, if you're that passionate about it, it's not worth fighting over. And you could say, well, that's great, David, but why are we talking about this in church? And I would say that some of us are fine with the system that we're already using. We have a current system. Maybe you're the aggressive type, and you're the in-your-face type, and you're gonna be the person that says, oh, I'm gonna give her what's what. And someone has to put that person in their place. Oh, I'm gonna say something. Or you're the other person, you're the shy person like me, and you would tend to withdraw. And so whatever system that you're using, it works for you, and you're not really interested in changing. But I would argue that we all need to work on this, get better at this, and improve. This is a skill, a life skill, that we should all get better at. And you would say, well, that's great, David, but why are we talking about it in church? Because it doesn't really feel like a Bible topic. I don't remember Jesus ever giving that lecture. He didn't give that seminar on how to resolve issues with friends. And I think about it like this. When I read the Bible, when I read the stories, when I read the teachings, what I see is evil tries to put us at odds with one another. Evil and darkness stirs everything up. Evil puts you at war with others. Evil wants to put you at war with God. Evil wants to separate you from God. So the purpose of sin and evil is to break relationships. Evil puts you at enmity with other people and with God. Isn't that what evil does? You look at Romans 1. It says, since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, this would be rebellion, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliceness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. This is what evil does. When you look at that verse has all these words about separation, division, disobedience, enmity in relationships. This is what evil does. One of the devil's titles is that of the accuser. An accuser is one who divides. The devil accuses you before God. The devil accuses you before other people. But Jesus comes to reconcile. Jesus comes to restore and to make things right. 2 Corinthians 5 says, all this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. What's that? There's a ministry of reconciliation. So some of you middle child types just got really excited because this is what you're all about. The middle children love to reconcile between parents and the younger siblings, so you're speaking my language. So how did Jesus summarize the Bible? When he was asked how to summarize the law and the prophets, Jesus said 4 words, right? Love God and love others. Which means if you have not reconciled with someone, or if you have not reconciled with God, and you are at odds with them, and you're okay with that, then I would ask, do you really love them? Because these are Jesus' instructions to us, to love God and to love others. So unity is central to the gospel. And so if the good news of Jesus is about restoring and repairing those relationships, wasn't it Jesus' ministry also to repair the relationships between enemies and between nations and between God and humanity? So if the gospel is about reconciliation, we as the church, we should also be about reconciliation. And if we, as Christians, are sent out to repair relationships, how do we navigate conflict resolution? Especially here, especially in our home base, especially at church. So our strongest skill should be conflict resolution. Why do we even have conflict in the first place? I mean, we're all Christians, right? For all Christians, we should all agree. We should all agree. We should all be above this. We should all be loving our neighbor and loving our enemies. This should be second nature to us, right? We're going to look back at a quick story in Galatians chapter 2. And it's a story about Peter. And what I think is funny is, last week we read that Peter received a vision from God, right? About how the food that they were eating was no longer unclean. And Peter made this connection that it applied to everyone, that it applied to racism. And yet, we always think of Paul as being the pioneer Jew that bridged the gap with the Romans, but it was actually Peter who did it first. And so we're going to look at Galatians chapter 2, verse 11. And it says, but when Cephas, who's Peter, came to Antioch, I, Paul, so Paul's writing in the first person, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned, for he regularly ate with the Gentiles before certain men came from James. However, when they came, he withdrew and separated himself because he feared those from the circumcision party, or he feared those who were Jewish Christians. So Peter's one of the first apostles to preach the gospel to the Gentiles. Peter had a special revelation from God in a dream, making it clear to him that God had chosen to pour his grace on the Gentiles, making them clean also by the blood of Christ. It's Peter who stood before the council in Jerusalem and defended the baptism of the Gentiles. And this is a principle that we all need to hear and to understand, because right here at the beginning, Paul explains that Peter is also afraid. We have conflict because of fear. Conflict comes from fear. Paul tells us that fear was key to Peter's downfall. Fear of what? We don't know. Of being thought of less, of losing influence, but clearly he doesn't have a fear of God. He has a fear of people. Peter is afraid of the other Jews who see him hanging out with Gentiles. And so in conflict, even today, there is this fear of what other people will think of us. And it's the motivation of this that ends up with hurtful words, and it fuels all of our disagreements. If you look at verse 13, it says, "Then the rest of the Jews joined his hypocrisy, and that even Barnabas was carried away by their hypocrisy." So Peter was not pretending to serve God for the sake of others, but he was pretending that he didn't associate with the non-law-keeping Gentile believers when the law-observant Jews came to visit. So you can imagine that impact that it would have on those believers. You know, yesterday, they were okay company to hang out with, but apparently now that the real Christians or the Jewish Christians were there, now to Peter, he acted like he didn't know them. Now they're nobodies. And that could be really hurtful to someone, couldn't it? And so it's hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is another reason that we have conflict. And what makes this genuinely hypocrisy, and the fact that Paul is calling this out, is the fact that Peter was clearly acting in a way that was contrary to what he believed. He believed that the Gentiles were saved, and he believed that they were fine and there was nothing wrong with them. And it was that he was siding with the Judaizers almost only when they were around. Hypocrisy is hurtful to so many people, and it discredits what he's trying to do. What's the number one excuse you always hear about why someone doesn't want to come to church? It's filled with hypocrites, right? Man, you'd think that if this was our reputation, then we would want to do something about it. You look at verse 14. It says, "But when I saw that they were deviating from the truth of the gospel, I told Cephas in front of everyone, 'If you, who are a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you compel Gentiles to live like Jews?'" So it's another source of conflict, especially among Christians. It's legalism. This is the belief that being a true Christian requires you to act a certain way or to adhere to an external set of standards. And you know what? You know what's fascinating? You know, we always hold these two guys up very high in the church, Peter and Paul. Peter and Paul never hammered this out between them. We don't know that they ever ended up agreeing, because even though he preached grace, Paul still adhered to a lot of his early teaching. And Peter was just way too loosey-goosey for Paul's standards. And we love Paul. We hold his teachings very high in the church. But on the other hand, Peter walked with Jesus and knew him personally. So you kind of have to just kind of put them both off to the side and say, you know what? Only God judges. Only God holds the measuring rod. But all too often there's conflict, especially amongst Christians, especially amongst what one person believes versus one other person believes. He's too liberal or she's too conservative, or I'm with Peter or I'm with Paul. It's stupid. Jesus came to do away with all of that. He came to destroy fear, he came to expose the hypocrites, and he came to do away with legalism and to cover everything with his grace. So how do we do it? You want to get better at conflict resolution? You look at Jesus' most famous saying, in Matthew chapter 7. Jesus says, "How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Okay, so here, Jesus acknowledges that hypocrisy, that's what we just talked about, is a source of conflict. And so what does he suggest? He says, how do you begin? Because there's a word in there that says first, right? What's the first step towards making peace? Jesus says, first, take the log out of your own eye. What's the first step to any recovery or any addiction program? What's the first step? It's always admit, right? Admit that some of the problem is you. What did your teacher always tell you in school? When you point your finger at someone, you have 4 fingers pointing back at you, right? Just remember that the first step to conflict resolution is to confess. Conflict resolution begins with confession. James 5:16 says, confess your sins to one another, pray for one another, that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. And then we would think, well, confess? Confess what? How is that a first step? Because they hurt me. Yes, but notice what Jesus says. When you have a problem with someone, especially if you feel like it's your job to go and fix it, just consider this. Maybe the reason that you have an issue is because of some other problem in your life. Maybe some of this is your responsibility. Actually, not only that, Jesus assumes it. Jesus assumes this in his statement, that the person who is brave enough to initiate the conflict resolution is also the person with the bigger problem. Oh, I'm going to give her a piece of my mind. Okay, but did you ever assume that maybe you are also part of the problem? I'm going to march right over there and put that person in their place. Okay, but is it possible that you have an even bigger issue in your life? What's the primary motivation that you have to resolve this conflict in the first place? Why do you care so badly? Is it revenge? You just want to tell them off? You want to put them in their place, cut them down? Is it selfish ambition? Is it vain conceit? Our motivation has to be in the right place, or else our beam is bigger. Because no matter what Christian thing you say or how you frame it, if your motivation is not pure love, in other words, if Jesus isn't at the center of the conversation, the other person, no matter how nice you put it, they will respond in kind. So here, just before you go and address someone, just ask yourself, why did this make me so mad? Why do I care so much? Is this something that's bottled up in me? Why did this set me off? If I was in this conversation, did I hear something about myself? Was there something that was said that reminded me of something from my past? Where have these words hurt me before? And you know, oftentimes, the person who learns the most is the teacher. The biggest opportunity for growth is the person who feels triggered. What else does Jesus say? Jesus says in Matthew 18:15, if your brother sins against you, go and tell them their fault between you and them alone. So have a private conversation. You have a private conversation. And, you know, this is Jesus, all right? These are Jesus' words. These aren't mine. This isn't my opinion. If you have a problem or an issue, someone has hurt your feelings, took something from you, owes you money, yelled at your kids, gave you a failing grade, grabbed your parking space, you tell them in private. And this is a tough one. I know it is. We'd rather tell our friends. We would rather tell our spouse. We would rather tell other people to get them onto our side. Because when we have people on our side, then we feel confident. Then we feel like our cause is just. I was hurt. They were wrong. Everybody else agrees with me. Well, of course everybody else agrees with you. Everyone else has only heard one side of the story. It's pretty easy to win an election if you're the only one who's running. I know it's hard. It's confrontational. The Bible tells us to do it. And do you know why I think the Bible tells you to do it? Because if telling the other person first, if that's the only option, because that's really your only option, there's no, well, if that doesn't work, do B. This is your only option. I think many of us will just drop it. If your only option is to go and confront them and to say, hey, you hurt me and yada yada, and we might just decide, you know what, it's not worth it, and we drop it. And just think, gossip would end. Relationships would be restored more quickly if we could just follow that one verse from Jesus. Go tell them in private. So you're motivated. You're going to check yourself. You're going to give yourself an internal diagnostic. You're going to go to the other person in private, and you walk up across their patio, you knock on their door, they open the door, and then what do you say? Surefire way to resolve conflict. Number one, describe what happened. Describe the behavior. In other words, whatever was said, whatever was done, you describe it specifically with no judgment and no paraphrase. This should be an inarguable description of facts. All the men in the room should like this first one. This is what we love. Just facts. No emotion. Just give me the facts. Last Thursday, we were at a party, and you said, cat people are crazy. Right? That's what happened. Last Thursday, we were at a party, you said, cat people are crazy. If you have a problem at this point, maybe this is the problem. The two of you don't have your facts straight. Right? If there's a problem right now at step one, probably they don't know the facts, or you've got the facts wrong. So this could easily fix the problem right here. After you describe the facts, then you share your interpretation of what happened. In other words, you tell the officer, officer, those two cars hit each other. That's a fact. Your interpretation would be, I think the blue car was going too fast. That would be your interpretation of what happened. Interpretation is how it looks to you. You want to be the one who's resolving the conflict. You should always separate your facts from your feelings. So let me tell you what happened, and this is what it said to me. Last Thursday, we were at a party. You said, cat people are crazy. And I interpreted that to mean that you don't like people who own cats. Next, you share how it affected you. This is where the emotions go. They go last. This is where your feelings go. Last Thursday, we were at a party. You said, cat people are crazy. And I interpreted that to mean that you don't like people who own cats. And that kind of upset me because I own 20 cats, and I am not crazy at all. Right? I wanted to find a picture of a person with 20 cats. This is where you say, I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel mad, I was hurt. You don't start there. I know you're there, but you don't start there. You have to help the other person get to where you're at. It took you a while to get where you're at, so you kind of help them see. That made me upset. And this might be where some of us stop, but you have to include one more thing. You need to specifically name a change that you want. You have to name some sort of change that you desire. And if you were talking to your children and trying to correct a behavior, this is where you have to put this part in too. You can't just say, your actions made me angry, and then leave. You have to then explain, this is the change I would like to see. Saying you hurt my feelings and then storming out, you're not giving the other person a chance to make things right. Last Thursday, we were at a party, and you said, cat people are crazy, and I interpreted that to mean that you don't like people who own cats. And that kind of upset me because I own 20 cats, and I'm not crazy at all. You know, in the future, I would just recommend keeping comments like that to yourself because you never know who might be listening. In the future, can you say something like, X? Is that something you'd be willing to try? I would really appreciate an apology. Give the person the chance to rectify that relationship. Give that person a chance to build a path or to move forward on a road. This has got to be something that the church gets 100% right all the time. Not just once in a while, but all the time. In fact, when Jesus prayed to his heavenly Father, right before he was arrested, what was on his heart? You know, if it was the night before you were going off to prison, or if it was the night before you were going off to jail, what would you pray about? Probably yourself, your own well-being, your own safety, your own health. What does Jesus pray for? In John 17, he says, I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one. I and them, you and me, that they may become perfectly one. Jesus prays for unity. He prays for the unity of all believers. And he says specifically, not just the ones currently, but even the ones that will believe in me in the future. Before he goes to the cross, before he endures all that he had to endure, and you just launch into a Good Friday sermon right now and just describe all the things that Jesus had to horrifically endure, his last human prayer to pray for was for you and the unity of the church. You and I, we have to get this right then. The church can no longer be associated with gossip or backstabbing or church splits or arguments or lying or unforgiveness or cliques or division or hypocrisy. This has been the reputation for the church for far too long, and it can't be going forward. The church and her members need to pursue unity at all costs. You and I, we have to build a new reputation. We need to be known as peacemakers, as reconcilers, as bridge builders, as enmity killers. And we do that by putting Jesus at the center of everything we do. Jesus has to be the heart of the church. Jesus has to be the center of the church. We live a Christ-centered life. That's what being a Christian is. Not a me-centered life. So, as we've been talking, maybe there's been a name, a person, a face, a group of people that have been on your mind or been on your heart. I would just say, well, whose name kept popping up in your head? You know, who's that person? What relationship is that kept recycling itself? Is there somebody who needs your reconciliation, your forgiveness, or you need to have them forgive you? God doesn't want you to leave it alone any longer. I know you think it's hopeless. I know you think that she's just beyond reason. She won't listen to reason. It's like throwing pearls to swine. Okay, but, and yet I don't know what they did to you. That's true. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. A Christian restores. A Christian builds. We worship a God who builds. We worship a God who creates. Our God is an inventor. Our God is a gardener. He makes, he creates, he builds, he restores. A Christian should bring things together. Division, separation, enmity, that's from the accuser. That should never be a part of what we do at church. That should never be a part of what we speak as a Christian. A Christian puts things back together because it is the Lord's prayer, right? To create on earth what exists in heaven, to restore, to build something, to make something new. Put Jesus at the center and go and reconcile that relationship. Let's pray.